This is Rico. Rico is our pet panther chameleon. We got him at a few months old, mid to late February of 2022. So we've owned Rico for about a year and a half now, and we think it's maybe a good time to share some of the knowledge that we've learned in that year and a half to talk to you about whether or not you should get a chameleon. Now, before we continue, I'd like to tell you a little bit about us. We live in South Florida. It's myself and my girlfriend.
Hi.
You can probably hear her in the background. We have a bunch of pets. She likes to say we have a small petting zoo. Isn't that right, babe?
Yes.
We do have a small petting zoo. And we want to share the love that we have for our wonderful animals with you, starting with today's video. Now to the topic at hand. Should you get a pet chameleon? Well, if that is what you're thinking about, the first step, congratulations, you're already doing it, is to do research. Watch YouTube videos. Find some people that you know maybe already have chameleons. It's really a wonderful thing. And I've got notes here in front of me, and this is big, bold. Ready? Pay very close attention. This is very important. Like anything else, you should always do your research before making any serious purchase, whether that's a car or a house or a really expensive, fancy gaming computer. You should do research, especially jewelry, yes, jewelry, especially if that purchase you're making is a living animal. These things have feelings and emotions. They're living creatures. You should be very sure that you not only want, but are willing to take care of one of these wonderful animals. When we were researching before we got Rico, we looked at a lot of YouTube videos. We looked at different websites. We checked in with different breeders to see what they had to say. We even found a local chameleon page on Facebook, and we read the FAQs in there, and they have, different resources that you can use that'll tell you what you need to house the chameleon and the different types of chameleon. I want to say I saw something that says there's like hundreds of different species of chameleons, so they're not all going to be the same. So it's important to do your research to know potentially what kind of chameleon you want and what it's going to take to care for that specific type of chameleon. Because just like us or anything else, not all chameleons are going to be the same. Not all chameleons are going to need the same thing. So it's very important to do research and to find videos and blogs and Facebook pages and things to soak up as much information as you can so that when the time comes, you are confident that you know what you're doing and that you're going to be willing and able to care for this wonderful chameleon. Now, a minute or two ago, I mentioned breeders, that we talk to breeders, and I'm going to kind of get into that a little bit more here. I know that a lot of people, when they think about getting a chameleon, you think, oh, well, I'll go to PetSmart. I'll go to Pet Supermarket or whatever the big box pet store close to you is called. And that is an option. However, I'm going to put a caveat in here. A lot of the times, places like that sell wild-caught chameleons. And these chameleons were caught somewhere, potentially not even in the same state or country that you're in. Fortunately, in Florida, we have a lot of chameleons out in the wild here. But if you live in Wisconsin, that chameleon was caught and put in a box and put on a boat and put in a plane, not fed and not given enough water or heat or proper UVB. And it comes in stressed and tired and sick and malnourished, which are all horrible, awful things and can very often be fatal to a chameleon. Chameleons are very susceptible to stress. So any major stress put on a chameleon can be just devastating. So we got our chameleon, Rico, from a breeder. Now, a breeder is going to cost you more money. That's what these people do. They breed and they sell these cams, and it is going to cost more. But think of it like almost purchasing insurance on your chameleon. It's more likely, now it's not always going to be perfect, but it's more likely that buying from a reputable breeder, you are going to get a healthy and happy chameleon who is willing and ready to grow with you. And when we got our chameleon from a breeder, it was a hard pill to swallow. Oh my gosh, this chameleon cost 10 times more than what it cost at PetSmart. But I really think that it's worth it, because you never know what kind of condition you're going to get this wild-caught chameleon from or in. And it just is very sad, to put it lightly. It's very sad. Now I'm going to step down from my soapbox and talk about one more thing while you're doing your research. And this, I'm sure to a lot of you, is going to be like, well, duh, of course. Make sure you have resources near you that you can go to care for your chameleon. Like exotic pet, veterinarians and things like that, sure. But you'd be surprised how often I see on like the Facebook page, people, they have to get rid of their chameleon because there's no store close enough to them that sells crickets or bugs to feed their chameleon. And you'd think, oh, I'm going to purchase this living animal. Maybe I should look up what it needs to eat and see if I can get that for it. But that's not always the case. So it's very important to know not only what you should feed your chameleon, how often you should feed your chameleon, but where to get it from and if it's viable for you to be able to get that. So now that we've covered the research portion, let's get on to preparation. So you can't just go buy a chameleon and then figure it out. They need very specific things. So it's important to have an enclosure ready when you get your chameleon, because then you're not stressing it out, keeping it in the box you got it from until you have the setup ready for it. And the first step into that, which you should already know a little bit from the previous step with the research, is you should know how big your chameleon will eventually be. Because when we got Rico, he was very small. I mean, he was probably 6 inches long, including his tail, maybe 8 max. And that's not very big. And you'd think, oh, well, little dude, doesn't need much room. But some chameleons can get almost 30 inches long. That's a big lizard. A chameleon of that size would need a cage that's about 3 feet long, 3 feet wide, and like 4 feet tall. Do you have the space for that? Maybe you should think about getting something smaller if you don't. And this is all things you should have already thought about in the research stage. And while you're looking at enclosures, it's important to look at the different types. So I'm sure if you picture a chameleon in your head, or anything you've seen about chameleons online, potentially you've done research, you can see them climbing through the trees and all of that fun stuff. But when they're in an enclosure, it's very important for a chameleon to have proper airflow, because they live in, jungles and rainforests, very humid environments. And if your cage doesn't have proper airflow and you keep it humid like they need it, and there's no place for that humidity to escape, it can be very bad for your chameleon. When the air gets stagnant and nasty like that inside, for example, like a glass cage, maybe you converted a fish tank, and it's glass on all sides without very good airflow, your chameleon can get sick. They can get respiratory issues from breathing in that stagnant, super humid air, and it's not good for them. So it's important that when you do get a cage, that it has good airflow. Now, it doesn't have to be a screen enclosure. You can do plexiglass or glass enclosures, but you have to make sure that it's set up in a way that it has sufficient airflow. And there are examples.
That's fine too.
Yeah, we have a screen enclosure. It's probably your best bet. like my girlfriend says, just don't get a glass cage. It's easier to go with screen. But if for whatever reason you hate screens so much, never in the world, maybe don't get a chameleon. Maybe get something else. But if you need a chameleon and you can't have a screen cage, make sure that there's proper airflow. And there are videos on YouTube of people setting up cages that work just fine that aren't screen. But it's more work, and you have to be prepared to do that. So now you've got your enclosure. Obviously you've got to fill it with something. The chameleon needs something to climb on. So we're going to move on to plants. And there's a reasonable bit of debate in just any community that houses live animals, but a lot of it is in the chameleon community for sure, about live plants versus fake plants. Now we have live plants. I'm sure you can see in the videos that are playing, we have live plants in our enclosure, but there are some people who have a black thumb. They can't keep a live plant alive to save their life. That's a lot of lives in a row there. They can't keep a plant alive. Like, for example, my mother, she underwaters cactus. How do you underwater a cactus? I know you can overwater one, but you really have to be neglectful to underwater a cactus. So some people just can't do it. Everything they touch dies when it comes to plants, and they need to have those plastic fake plants. And if that is how it is for you, sure, do your thing. But, and this is a very, very big but, it is so much better, so much more enriching for a chameleon and for you as the owner looking at this cage constantly to have live plants in there. And a lot of the stuff that we see, even the plastic, could be harmful. So you got to think, a chameleon is a reptile, they're cold-blooded, they need a heat lamp, and we'll get into that in the next section. But this heat lamp gets hot. And if you've got plastic plants underneath this hot heat lamp, it may not necessarily melt them, but applying heat to plastic could release some nasty toxins. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to sit in my house and have nasty toxins released all day. So I can't imagine your chameleon would feel any better than you or I would. So we feel that live plants are really the only way to go. And for example, our chameleon, Rico, he likes to chew on leaves from time to time. Or we've had hibiscus in there with him before, and he would chew on the hibiscus petals. With a fake plant, now your chameleon's chewing on a piece of plastic that could potentially be harmful. And it's a little more work to keep plants alive. Oh man, you got to water them and make sure they get sufficient light. But in the long run, it's significantly better for your chameleon's health, for your enjoyment, the entertainment value for both you and the chameleon. It's just better to have live plants. So let's move on now to lighting and heat. Like I said a few minutes ago, chameleons are reptiles, which means that they're cold-blooded. So they need a heat source for their metabolism to be active enough for them to digest food and be able to move around. So you're going to have some form of heat and some form of UVB. And a UVB and a heat bulb are absolutely necessary. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. You've gotta have them in order for your chameleon to be not only healthy, but happy. So starting with the heat bulb, chameleons, they don't have to be, like 120 degrees all the time. They live in rainforest underneath the trees in the shade, it's pretty humid like we've talked about, but standard temperature of the ambient area for most species can be anywhere between 72 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. That's not too hot. I'm sure you keep your house at that temperature. So it's not a big deal for the ambient temperature to keep that reasonable for your chameleon. However, The basking temperature for a chameleon, once again, that's where they go to sit to heat up so they can digest their food, can be between 85 and 95 degrees Fahrenheit. So you've got to make sure that this heat lamp that you have is positioned in a way that it heats up a basking spot for them properly and sufficiently. So during the day, that's fine. But at night, a chameleon does expect a slight drop in temperature, lower to that room temperature, 72, 80, maybe on the lower end of that. So if you live in an area that gets really cold at night, you may need one of those red light night bulbs to keep the heat in the cage for your chameleon's well-being, so that it can still have that heat, but the light's not on bright as daytime, keeping you up or the chameleon up all the time. Us living in South Florida, it never really gets that cold down here. Our cold season is maybe a week of the whole year, maybe less sometimes, and it gets maybe 50 degrees at the coldest. So in our case, we don't have a light for the nighttime. We just let Rico hang out at the ambient house temperature at night. But if you live in, Minnesota or Canada, it gets pretty cold, and you might have to have that heat lamp on at night as well. So it might be worth looking into one of those red night lights. Moving on to UVB light, this is absolutely imperative that you have a UVB bulb for your chameleon. The reason is UVB helps to energize the chameleon's body and helps it to produce D3. And what D3 does is it's necessary in order for the chameleon's body to be able to absorb calcium. And if you remember anything from life science, calcium is necessary for all animals. It makes your bones strong. That's why your parents said drink your milk when you were little. It's the same thing for a chameleon. They need calcium to help their bones grow strong. And a lack of calcium can lead to some pretty serious problems. It can cause your chameleon to die pretty painfully from MBD, or metabolic bone disease. It's a very common reason for chameleons that are captive to die, and it's very preventable. It's very preventable. Make sure they have enough calcium in their system, and make sure they can process it by giving them that UVB light. Now, UVB lights are a little strange. When you order a UVB light or buy a UVB light, they'll give you these weird percentage numbers. And basically what that is the percentage it tells you is what percentage of light produced by the bulb is actual UVB rays. So common percentages for people keeping chameleons are like, they make 6% bulbs, they make 12% bulbs. They have like 18% bulbs. Those are a little overkill. You could use that, but it's not necessary. 6% and 12% are the most common percentages used when caring for a chameleon. So let's move on now to what you should feed your chameleon. We feed Rico primarily crickets. It's the most readily available insect that is in our area, but your chameleon may not like crickets. They're not all going to. For example, Rico, for a very long time, up until maybe a couple months ago, refused to ever even try to eat a superworm. So it's going to vary. Your chameleon may love crickets. Your chameleon may hate crickets. Your chameleon may only eat dubia roaches, which we can't do here, but maybe that's what your chameleon prefers and the only thing that it is going to eat. So you got to kind of work with your chameleon to find out what it wants to eat. Otherwise, along with feeding these things, you could do a couple other things. You can supplement some of the dietary requirements when feeding your chameleon. So for example, we coat our crickets in a calcium solution to make sure that Rico's getting enough calcium. We also, every once in a while, will give him some D3, which we just talked about when we were talking about the UVB. And that's something we do every time we feed him. We dust the crickets with calcium or D3 supplement, just to make sure that he's getting all those necessary vitamins and minerals in his system. A lot of people, what they'll do is they will do gut-loaded insects. So these are insects that have been fed food that has all of those things in it already. So there's not an extra step of dusting the cricket or the mealworm or the superworm every time you feed your chameleon. It's just already in the insect's body. You can pass it over.
Sometimes we gut load our crickets with vegetables and like oatmeal.
That is true. We do, in order to keep the crickets alive for any reasonable period of time, you have to feed them. So we make sure that if we have a big group of crickets that we need to keep alive for a little longer, that we feed them nice things, vegetables, oats, oatmeal, things like that, that are going to be providing those good minerals and vitamins for the chameleon when we do feed him. So finally here, let's move on to what a daily care looks like for Rico specifically. And this may not be exactly what you do, but this is what we do, and we found that it works pretty well. So I wanted to share this list with you. So I'm just going to go down. I have a bullet pointed list in front of me, and I'm going to tell you the steps for what we do every day. So every morning, the light comes on about, 8 o'clock? About 8 o'clock. So we make sure to get up at 7:30, and about half an hour before the light goes off, we spray down the enclosure with some water. This is to not only help keep the plants alive, but it simulates, morning dew and things like that. You got to think these chameleons live in places that are very humid. So the morning dew and things like that are very common in these kind of areas. So it helps to keep it as natural as possible. Give the chameleon something to drink, some of the dew drops off of leaves. And like I said, it also benefits the plants as well. You're spraying them down with water. So that's about 30 minutes before the lights come on. And around 8 o'clock, the lights will come on. We'll give Rico a little while to wake up as we're doing our thing in the morning, getting ready for work or whatnot. And then 3 to 4 times a week, we did it about every day when he was little while he was still growing. But now that he's bigger, 3 to 4 times a week, we'll give him anywhere from 2 to 5 crickets, depending on how fat and juicy they are, with that supplement powder for breakfast. And then we will tend to his dripper, make sure his dripper has enough water and is dripping into a spot that's not going to spill all over the floor, and make sure that it's dripping at a reasonable rate. I absolutely hate the dripper because you can never get it calibrated just perfectly, but it is what it is. It works very well for us, so we're not going to change it. The next step is we may water any plants that look like they need to be watered. They're all in, their jars they come in. You get the plant from Home Depot. It's in a little pot. We keep them in there and we'll water them as we think they need it, just in case. And then we go about our day. He doesn't need to eat multiple times a day. He's a reptile, right? They don't need to eat constantly like a dog needs this much food every day, 2 times a day, or you eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner. That's not really how it works. So we have been feeding Rico in the morning every day or every couple days to make sure that he's getting those nutrients, but you don't want to overfeed him. A fat chameleon is not a very good climber, I'd imagine. I've never seen an obese chameleon, but I imagine they would not be very good at climbing. So we'll go about our day and we'll do our thing. And then at about 7 to 8 p.m., the lights will turn off. That gives him about 12 hours of the UVB and the heat bulb. And ours are on a timer, so it just does it automatically. So we don't even have to think about it. But you could do it sun up, sundown, just so that he has enough time with the heat and with the UVB to absorb all the nutrients that he needs to absorb. And then once again, after the lights have been off for a little while, it's not so hot in the cage anymore, we'll spray it down. And that is kind of the reason we spray 30 minutes before, 30 minutes after. It's because if you do it too closely to when the lights come on, that excess water in the enclosure will make it real humid, which is not, like we talked about, always the best thing for your chameleon. So I think that's about all I've got to say. I may have missed some things, and if I'm not thinking of it and I miss something and you're sitting there, oh my goodness, how could you not say this? Please feel free. Remind me in the comments. Let me know what I missed. I would be glad to hear from you, and I will happily correct myself and thank you in the comments. Otherwise, we've been Everything But Dogs. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.